year at the grocery store. The same product you bought last year for $3 is now $5.50. You walk to the register. Same cart, bigger bill. On your way home, you wonder, how does this keep happening? And who's actually responsible? The government says energy prices. The Fed says too much demand. The media says war, drought, supply chains. All partially true, but none of them ask the real question. Where does money come from, and who decides how much of it exists? Today, the real cause of inflation. No politics, just history and economic fact. Let's start at the foundation. Inflation is the general rise in price levels over time. Most people know that. But here's the question almost no one asks. Are prices going up, or is the value of money going down? Think of it like a pie. Cut into 8 slices. You get 1. Fair. Now cut the same pie into 16 slices. The pie didn't grow. Your slice just shrank by half. That's inflation in its purest form. When the supply of goods stays the same, but the money supply grows, each dollar, each pound, each euro buys less. This isn't a modern problem. In the 16th century, Spain brought back tons of gold and silver from the Americas. Prices in Spain quadrupled, not because goods got scarcer, but because money got more abundant. Economists call it the price revolution. Same mechanism, different century. If you follow this series, especially the Federal Reserve episode and the money printing addiction episode, this next part will hit differently. In modern economies, money is created 2 ways. First, central banks. To finance government spending, they buy government bonds, injecting new money directly into the system. This is called quantitative easing, or in plain language, money creation. Second, commercial banks. When you deposit $1,000, the bank doesn't keep it in a vault. It lends most of it out. That borrower deposits it somewhere else. The cycle repeats. This is fractional reserve banking. The result, every $1,000 entering the system can multiply 5 to 10 times within the banking network. The money supply expands, but real production, actual goods and services, doesn't keep pace. That gap is where inflation is born. All right, I need to stop here for a second and say something. I know this is a small channel. You can see that. And honestly, the fact that you're here right now, watching this, giving this video a chance, that alone tells me I'm on the right track. If you're enjoying this series, a like, a comment, even just finishing the video, it means more than you'd think. And if you have an idea for what the next topic should be, drop it in the comments. I read everything. And if something isn't working, the pacing, the topic, anything, tell me that too, in the comments or over in the community tab. I'd genuinely rather know. Your input shapes where this channel goes, so thank you for being here. Now, let's get back to it. So why do governments rely on this system? Because the alternatives are harder. Raising taxes is politically painful. Cutting spending is even harder. Borrowing has limits. But expanding the money supply, though, it's quiet. It's invisible, and it generates no immediate public backlash. Economists call this the inflation tax because technically it isn't a tax, but it functions identically. The purchasing power of your savings quietly erodes. The government funds its programs. This has happened across history repeatedly. The Roman Empire diluted its silver coins. Same weight, but less silver. The value quietly declined. During World War I, Germany printed money to fund the war. By 1923, a loaf of bread cost millions of marks. There's a photograph from that era of people carrying money in wheelbarrows because the wheelbarrow itself was worth more than the cash inside it. After 2008, the US, Europe, and Japan all launched large-scale monetary expansion. We covered that in part 2 of this series. Then came 2020, a global pandemic. Trillions of dollars, euros, and pounds injected into economies worldwide. By 2021 and 2022, the world saw some of the steepest price increases in modern history. Coincidence? Here's the objection that always comes up. Inflation isn't just money printing, it's supply and demand. That's fair, and we're not dismissing it. Supply-side inflation is real. Oil prices spike, production costs rise, prices follow. Cost-push inflation. Demand-side inflation is real. An overheating economy where everyone spends at once, prices surge. Demand-pull inflation. Both exist, both matter. But ask yourself one more question. Why do these triggers produce such outsized damage? Because the system was already primed, the money supply was already inflated, the economy was already fragile. A small shock produces enormous waves. Think of a balloon. You pump it full of air, it stretches but holds. Then a pin barely grazes it. The explosion looks catastrophic. Was it the pin or the pressure already built up inside? Inflation works the same way. The trigger is always changing. The structural cause is almost always the same. Inflation is not neutral. It redistributes wealth, quietly and at scale. Who wins? Debtors. Inflation erodes the real value of debt over time. A mortgage taken out 10 years ago becomes lighter as inflation rises. Governments with massive sovereign debt think about this the same way. Asset holders, stocks, real estate, commodities, their nominal values rise with the money supply. People who own things are protected. People who hold cash are not. Who loses? Wage earners and retirees. Salaries almost never keep up with inflation in real time. Purchasing power quietly disappears. Savers. Cash in a bank account loses real value every year. The interest rate rarely covers the inflation rate. And who loses most? Middle and lower income households. They spend the highest proportion of income on essentials: food, rent, energy, transport. These are exactly the categories that inflation hits hardest and fastest. Inflation, then, is an invisible transfer of wealth from savers to asset owners, from lower incomes to upper incomes. Intentional? That's debated. The outcome, however, is not. History does offer real examples of fighting inflation successfully. In the early 1980s, Federal Reserve Chair Paul Volcker raised interest rates to nearly 20%. The economy entered recession, unemployment rose sharply, but inflation was broken. A brutal prescription. It worked. Some countries pegged currencies to the dollar or gold. Others built independent central banks with explicit inflation mandates. Some passed constitutional fiscal limits. Bitcoin, with its hard, capped supply, was engineered specifically as an answer to monetary expansion. We explored that in Part 3. Gold standard advocates argue for something even more fundamental, restructuring the entire relationship between money and value. We covered that in Part 6. Every approach carries trade-offs. There is no painless solution. But one thing is certain: understanding how inflation works is the first step to not being its victim. Every time you walk into a grocery store, every time a price tag stops you in your tracks, know this: it's not just the economy doing what economies do. Behind every price increase are decisions, policy decisions, monetary decisions, choices about who bears the cost. And who makes those decisions? Through what institutions? In whose interest? Asking those questions is what economic literacy actually means. Next episode, we bring the entire series together. We started with Jekyll Island in 1910. We traced the 2008 crisis, Bitcoin, the petrodollar, money printing, the gold war, the IMF, and today, inflation. One episode left. The full picture. See you there.